Okay, so generally, with regard to this whole Canelo-Khan situation, I've been pretty negative, but allow me to take a look at the bright side of things. With this, we may have a slight thawing, at least, of the Cold War, because we have a collaboration between Golden Boy and Heyman once more. We have Saul Canelo Alvarez, a Golden Boy fighter, fighting against Amir Khan, a Heyman fighter. And I will say that I believe a lot of this has come about due to the fact that Khan has been kind of openly expressing his dissatisfaction with the way his career has gone since he signed with Heyman. With the fact that he hasn't been able to get the fights that he wants for the paychecks that he wants. And so it seems like he's been kind of signed off to go across the battle line, so to speak, to fight Alvarez, get hella paid, take a big risk, and if he loses, then hey, I guess it's no big deal on Heyman's side of things because Khan could theoretically lose to any number of fighters in his stable in the first place, and it won't necessarily reduce his value in the grand scheme of things, even if he loses to Alvarez. But I will say that while the getting's good, it should be got. So I'd like to see this card stacked up with some other Golden Boy versus Heyman fights. Namely, let's get Luis Ortiz in there. Not necessarily against Deontay Wilder because, Wilder I'm sure is done being an undercard fighter from now on. He's going to be headlining. But fuck it, Luis Ortiz is still somewhat of a developmental project. He's supposed to be fighting soon, but who knows? Maybe they can move his fight back onto this card. Maybe Luis or if he disposes of whoever he winds up fighting next quickly enough. I mean, fuck it. Let's get Luis Ortiz versus Charles Martin. Or, I mean, if you want to preserve Charles Martin because who knows, maybe you're scared that he might lose that. Maybe Charles Martin is too valuable right now at the moment because he has that belt. Luis Ortiz has, I'm pretty sure Luis Ortiz has the interim belt, the interim WBA belt. They're going to consolidate that shit with Shagayev and Fury in eventually anyway, with the regular and the super titles. So fuck it, right now, might as well use his belt as the prize. So Luis Ortiz versus Bermane Stiverne, Luis Ortiz versus Chris Arreola. I mean, I like this Ortiz versus Stiverne because then we can compare and contrast how Ortiz does against Stiverne to how Wilder did against him. Or maybe get Ortiz in there versus Dominic Brazil, or Gerald Washington, or I want to say we can't really say Amir Mansour because he's out of action now, broken jaw and all that. He almost got his tongue bit off. But I like those fights. Those are good fights for Ortiz. I'm trying to think of what other heavyweights Heyman has. Hey, Antonio Tarver could use some money. No, I'm not even gonna really talk about that one. I'd rather see Ortiz against the aforementioned. Throw them in there. I mean, sure, Ortiz is obviously going to be favored, but let's be real. Ortiz is going to be favored over just about anybody in the division that's not named Tyson Fury right now. I mean, everybody else is pretty much food. That includes Alexander Povetkin, by the way. For all you guys that don't remember a little situation of Povetkin avoiding Vladimir Klitschko for, what was it, about 4 years? Trying to wait for the guy to get old. Didn't work. But that's besides the point. Another guy who, coincidentally, has been voicing his dissatisfaction with the way his career has gone the last couple of years, aside from Amir Khan, is one Gary Russell Jr. Now, I would say a lot of that has to do with him himself and the people that are closely around him more than it has to do with Heyman. Although, I could probably level the same criticism at Khan. But Gary Russell, I think he's done himself a disservice in large part over a number of factors. One of them being the fact that I don't think he makes 126 healthy enough. Which I would say is part of the reason why he looked so bad against Lomachenko. He didn't have a good cut for that camp. Because he definitely has the cut. I mean, you would think the guy would have learned his lesson after almost dying on the scale for the 2012 Olympics. Was it 2012 or the 2008 Olympics, rather? He was trying to weigh in at 119. He collapsed. He had to be hospitalized. They rehydrated his ass. And by the time they rehydrated him in the hospital with the IVs and everything, well, guess what? He wasn't even close to 119 anymore. So, I mean, being even within 10 pounds of a weight that almost killed you probably isn't the healthiest thing in the world. But since he's a champion there, since he has a title there, the WBC title to be exact, why not have him fight against Golden Boy's own Robinson Castellanos? Castellanos just happens to be the WBC #1 contender. I think that's pretty convenient. And even though Gary Russell would be the one that's favored, largely because a lot of people don't know who Castellanos is, quick note, y'all should actually be watching some of these Golden Boy Estrella cards. Some of these guys are going to be a real problem for some of the fighters that you consider highly touted world champions at the moment. So there's going to be some guys nipping on the heels very soon. Castellanos is one of those guys. Castellanos is very live against Gary Russell. And, I mean, especially if Gary Russell comes out looking like he did against Lomachenko, he could be in some deep shit against Castellanos. I'll say that much. So that's another fight that they could put on the undercard. We got Ortiz versus somebody like a Stiverne or Brazil. We got Castellanos versus Gary Russell Jr. Let's go a little bit further. I'm not entirely sure how high the Heyman squad is on Javier Fortuna, but I think the fans would love to see Francisco Vargas, the newly crowned WBC champion, versus the WBA quote-unquote regular champion, Javier Fortuna. Fortuna is a guy that's very temperamental. I mean, he's another guy that, you know, sometimes he looks like an absolute destroyer, a straight-up beast, and other times he looks very, very ordinary. He's a bit of a mini version of James Kirkland or Alfredo Angulo. Francisco Vargas on the Golden Boy side, Fortuna on the Heyman side. I think that's an excellent fight. I mean, I wouldn't mind Vargas versus Jose Pedraza either. And I mean, Pedraza looks like a little bit of a liability himself at with the IBF title, considering the fact that I didn't think he looked that great against Edmund Cherry. I thought Cherry almost beat him. I think Pedraza is clearly the weak link at 130. Although it could be argued that Fortuna is the weak link, but I think Fortuna's overall explosiveness, the power, makes him a bit less so. Even if he does tire midway through the bout, he usually tends to have a big enough lead that he can kind of coast. He can afford to do that. That's another possibility, Vargas versus Fortuna. And I mean, there's a hell of a lot more possibilities. I mean, even if they weren't going to be matched up that closely, I mean, hell, Golden Boy was trying to push Frankie Gomez. Frankie Gomez finally made weight. Speaking of which, yesterday he made weight. It looked good against a pretty tough opponent. Won a decision. Frankie Gomez was supposed to be on the card with Alvarez versus Kirkland. Golden Boy, I'm sure, is anxious after all the money they've spent on the kid to get him on a big card, to get his name out there more. They need to put him on this Canelo Alvarez versus Amir Khan card. Why not get Frankie Gomez against not even necessarily like an elite Heyman welterweight or an elite Heyman light welterweight? Get him against somebody that's at least in the mix. How about somebody who seems to have very similar issues to him? Somebody who has very similar problems in his overall life, his career, and so on and so forth. Why not get Frankie Gomez versus Omar Figueroa at welterweight? Two guys who really should be at light welterweight, but for whatever reason they can't seem to bring themselves to make the weight. Two guys who are aggressive as a motherfucker, who can make a fight of the year candidate against each other. Two guys who against other opponents, especially in Figueroa's case, in my opinion, could wind up losing, could wind up getting that O taken, and not necessarily in the best way, in the most marketable way. Or I mean, if that's a little bit too unequally yoked on the Golden Boy side, you know, fuck it. Get Frankie Gomez versus Amir Imam. I mean, Imam has a lot less to lose now since he already has a loss. He already lost to Adrian Granados, who coincidentally has a controversial, I think it was a majority decision loss to Frankie Gomez. Frankie Gomez versus Amir Imam, guaranteed action. Excellent fight, excellent undercard fight. If Imam wins, Frankie Gomez is an incredible scalp for him to have won against. If Frankie Gomez wins, I mean, Imam is just as big of a scalp on his legend in the same degree. I mean, these are just a few examples. If you guys got any more, I'd love to hear them. And I'm hoping that this isn't a one and done thing. I'm hoping that we get a few more cards like this, you know, throughout the year and over the next couple of years, because these mix-ups and matchups need to happen. You know, if we're gonna get any more clarity, which is desperately what we need in boxing in general, then we need these guys to start going across the battle lines, going across into enemy territory in the Cold War, and get it popping. Because that's what boxing's about. Yeah, boxing is supposed to be about, I'm the baddest motherfucker in this weight division. I'm the champ. All the other guys are paper champs. They're chumps. They call themselves a champion. They're the champion. They're the champion in their dreams, thinking about and wishing they were as good as I am. That's the way that all these guys should be thinking. And then they should go out to set about to prove those very thoughts that they have in their heads. So, let me know what you think, and I'm outie.